I used to think the deepest fear was isolation, but that summer, I learned it was what isolation let in. My name is Alex, and the story I'm about to tell you happened back in 1997. I was fresh out of high school, looking for a way to clear my head, and I found an advertisement for a seasonal fire lookout position deep in the Cascades. It felt like an escape, a chance to outrun the static of my own life, to trade city noise for the quiet hum of the wild. The job description was simple enough. Live alone in a tower, scan for smoke, report anomalies, and generally be a solitary sentinel. Back then, before smartphones and constant internet, isolation wasn't just a concept, it was a tangible, heavy thing that settled around you like the mountain fog. And that, I figured, was the biggest challenge. But I was wrong, terribly wrong. This isn't a tale about wildfires, or even about the ordinary solitude that can sometimes drive a person a little stir-crazy. This is about something else, something that defied every law of nature I thought I knew. Something that burrowed its way under my skin and into the foundations of my life. Something that followed me and never truly left. Years have crawled by since then, each one weighing me down with the memory of what I witnessed, what I felt, what I endured. I've recounted parts of it to a handful of people, always met with polite disbelief or worse, pity. The hope of finding someone who understands, who has experienced anything remotely similar, has faded to a faint ember. But a part of me, a deep, primal part, still believes I can't be the only one. My first few days at Tower 7 were a strange kind of paradise. The tower itself was a relic, a sturdy wooden structure reaching high above the tree line, battered by years of wind and sun. Inside, it was cramped but functional. A cot, a small propane stove, a desk with a topographical map, and the ever-present radio. Every morning, the sunrise painted the sky in fiery hues, turning the endless canopy of pines into a shifting canvas of greens and blues. I'd boil water for coffee on the tiny stove, the rich, earthy scent a comforting anchor in the vastness. Then, mug in hand, I'd ascend the short ladder to the observation deck, a glass-enclosed area that offered a breathtaking, yet humbling, 360-degree view. From up there, the forest stretched out, a dense, dark ocean of ancient trees rolling towards distant, jagged peaks. My binoculars became an extension of my eyes, ceaselessly sweeping the horizon for the telltale wisp of smoke that could signal disaster. There was a quiet pride in the responsibility, a sense of purpose in the immense solitude. My primary connection to the world was the radio, a crackling lifeline to the base and the handful of other lookouts scattered across the wilderness. Mornings and evenings I'd check in, a brief exchange of vital statistics, a reaffirmation that I wasn't entirely alone. The static and the distant voices were the only human sounds I heard for days on end, but the rhythm, that comforting, monotonous pulse of isolation, began to subtly shift on my fourth day. I was mid-morning, finishing my first sweep, the sun already high enough to cast sharp, defined shadows. My gaze drifted towards the far eastern edge of the tree line, an area rarely frequented, well beyond any marked trails. And then I saw it, or thought I saw it. A flicker, a momentary distortion in the uniform green. It was like a ripple in water, a brief bending of the light, too fleeting to be real. I blinked, adjusted my binoculars, focusing hard on the spot. Nothing, just the endless, unmoving trees. I chalked it up to eye strain, the vastness playing tricks. The mind, after all, seeks patterns where there are none. I continued my scan, but a subtle prickle of unease had begun to form beneath my skin, a feeling that something had momentarily slipped out of place. The following day, it happened again, clearer this time. In that same distant patch of woods I saw it, a shape. Not distinct, not a person, not an animal. It was a darker void against the dark green, a non-presence. It seemed to just be there, my breath hitched. This wasn't eye strain. This was something specific, something that didn't belong. It was stationary, silent, like a hole in the fabric of the forest itself. My hand instinctively reached for the radio microphone, my fingers brushing against the cold plastic. My supervisor, Marcus, was a no-nonsense type, a retired park ranger who'd seen it all. I imagined his gruff voice, his dismissal. Could I sound like an idiot reporting shadows? But the image, faint as it was, remained. My pulse thrummed against my temples. I pressed the transmit button, my voice coming out slightly more strained than I intended. "Base, this is Tower 7. Do you copy?" The radio crackled to life, Marcus's voice a familiar drone. "This is Base. Go ahead, Tower 7. Marcus, I'm seeing something unusual. eastern perimeter beyond the old logging road. Looks like a distortion, a dark shape. Too far to make out details, but it's stationary. Not an animal. Looks off. Over. I tried to sound professional, detached, but I could hear the tremor in my own voice. A beat of silence, then Marcus's dry chuckle. Alex, it's your first season. The woods play tricks on you out here. Especially when you're alone, probably just a trick of the light or a particularly thick patch of shadow. Keep your eyes on the real threats, son. Over. His words, intended to reassure, only fueled my irritation. Are you sure, Marcus? It's persistent. It doesn't look like anything I've ever seen. Not natural. Over. Another longer pause. This time when he spoke, his voice was laced with a hint of exasperation. Alex, I've had lookouts report Bigfoot, alien landings, even entire ghost towns appearing out there. It's the isolation, kid. Get some rest. Just focus on spotting smoke, and try not to imagine things. Over and out. The conversation ended with a definitive click, leaving me with the buzzing static and the infuriating certainty that I was being dismissed as another greenhorn losing his mind. I lowered the microphone, my gaze still fixed on the distant patch of woods. The shape was still there, a silent sentinel. I jotted down the time and coordinates in my logbook, a futile act of defiance against Marcus's dismissal. The peaceful rhythm of the tower had been irrevocably broken, replaced by a low thrum of anxiety. The afternoon crawled by, each hour stretching into an eternity. I tried to immerse myself in my duties, meticulously cleaning the observation glass, organizing my dwindling supply of canned goods, checking and rechecking the radio batteries. But my eyes kept drifting back to the eastern horizon. When it was time for my afternoon sweep, I approached the binoculars with a mix of dread and morbid curiosity. I focused them on the spot. The shape was gone. A wave of complicated relief washed over me, immediately followed by a fresh surge of unease. Had it retreated, or had it simply moved? The woods, vast and impenetrable, seemed to swallow secrets effortlessly. The evening check-in was blessedly normal. I reported nothing unusual, a lie that felt heavy on my tongue but spared me another lecture from Marcus. As the sun dipped below the peaks, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples, I heated up a can of stew. The cozy warmth of the small living area was no longer comforting. Every shadow seemed deeper, every creak of the old tower amplified. I secured the heavy wooden door, double-checked the latches on the windows, a ritual that suddenly felt less like routine and more like a desperate attempt to fortify myself against the encroaching darkness. Sleep didn't come easily that night. The wind outside sounded like whispers, the rustling leaves like shuffling footsteps. The next morning, the knot of apprehension in my stomach was tighter than ever. The coffee tasted bitter. I climbed to the observation deck, my hands trembling slightly as I picked up the binoculars. The forest felt less like a haven and more like a vast, watchful eye. I began my scan, trying to maintain the methodical routine. The morning light filtered through the canopy, creating a dappled pattern on the forest floor. And then I saw them. Not a single shape this time, but three, and they were closer. Significantly closer. They stood within a small clearing, no more than 200 yards from the base of my tower. My breath caught in my throat. As I focused the binoculars, the details, or lack thereof, were sickening. They were humanoid, yes, roughly the height and build of a person, but covered in what looked like dark, tattered remnants of cloth or perhaps simply shadow given form. Their features were obscured, blurred, as if looking through static on an old television screen. My eyes couldn't quite fix on them. They seemed to shimmer, to shift at the edges of my perception, refusing to coalesce into anything recognizable. It was less like seeing figures, and more like seeing blurs in the shape of people. A profound sense of wrongness settled over me. My hand darted for the radio. I needed to talk to someone, anyone, who might believe me. I remembered Silas, the old-timer at Tower 4, known for his eccentric stories and long stretches of service. Maybe he'd seen things. Tower 4, this is Tower 7. Do you copy? I tried to keep my voice steady, but the tremor was undeniable. The radio crackled. This is Tower 4. I read you Tower 7. What's shackin', kid? Silas's voice was gravelly, world-weary. Silas, have you ever seen anything unusual out there? Not animals, not people, shadowy figures, like distortions. I braced myself for the ridicule. A long silence stretched, punctuated only by static. Shadowy figures, you say? Silas finally rumbled. Been here near 30 years. Seen some things, bears, deer, mountain lions. Once saw a drunk hiker convinced he was a Sasquatch. No distortions, though. Why, what's got your britches in a twist? I exhaled slowly, the silence from Marcus's dismissal still fresh in my mind. I saw something like this 2 days ago far off, dismissed it. But now there are 3 of them. They're about 200 yards from my tower in the clearing to the east. They're just standing there, watching the tower. Watching me. Another pause, even longer this time. Then, Silas's voice came back softer, the usual cynicism replaced by something I couldn't quite decipher. Watching, huh? Not moving, just watching. Kid, are you getting enough sleep? This place can mess with your head, you know, make you see things that ain't there. I'm not imagining it, Silas, I insisted, gripping the microphone so hard my knuckles turned white. I thought I was at first, but they're here. Today they're closer. They don't look like people, not exactly. They're like shadows, but solid enough to be seen. And their features, they're like static, like my eyes can't focus on them. It's unnerving, Silas. It's utterly unnerving. The line went silent again. I could almost hear the gears turning in Silas's old head. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, low, almost a whisper, laced with an unsettling seriousness. Listen, kid. The old-timers, they used to talk about things in these woods that ain't natural. Things that move like shadows, things that wait. Don't go looking for explanations. Just stay safe, keep your door locked. And whatever you do, don't invite anything in. You understand? Yeah, I understand, I replied, though I truly didn't. His words offered no comfort. Instead, they deepened the sense of isolation, the weight of what I was seeing, what I was experiencing, settling heavier on my shoulders. I put the microphone back in its cradle, my eyes fixed on the distant blurs. The next morning, a chilling dread filled me. I had barely slept, haunted by Silas's cryptic warning and the shifting, unnatural forms. After making my coffee, I dragged myself to the observation deck, my hands shaking as I lifted the binoculars. I immediately scanned the small clearing where they had been yesterday. Empty. A flicker of hope immediately extinguished by a fresh wave of panic. I hadn't checked closer. My hands moved almost involuntarily, sweeping the binoculars across the terrain immediately surrounding the tower. And there they were. 3 of them, now no more than 100 yards away. They were closer to one of the narrow footpaths that spiderwebbed towards the tower, partially hidden by the dense trees, but undeniably nearer. My heart hammered against my ribs. I fumbled for the radio, my fingers pressing the transmit button with frantic urgency. Tower 4, this is Tower 7. Do you copy? This is critical. Silas's voice crackled through the speaker, concern evident. Tower 7, this is Tower 4. What's the situation, Alex? They've moved again, closer this time, just 100 yards away near the old Deer Run path. My voice was thin, reedy, betraying the sheer terror building inside me. There was a noticeable pause, then Silas's tone hardened. Are you sure it's them, Alex? Not some early hikers or hunters, people wander off trail. I'm sure, Silas, I practically screamed. These aren't people, not any kind I know. They're closer and it feels deliberate. Like they're testing me. They're just standing there unmoving, watching. Another stretched silence. Then Silas's voice grim. All right, Alex, listen to me. Keep your eyes peeled. Stay inside after dark, you hear me? Lock everything. And if you have anything at all, that could serve as a weapon, keep it close. Don't leave that tower. Over and out. Yeah, will do, I replied, my voice barely a whisper as I placed the microphone back. His words were a bleak confirmation that he believed me, that this was something truly out of the ordinary, and that I was utterly alone in facing it. I looked out over the forest, the shadowy forms blending and unblending with the trees, an impossible dance of light and shadow. The gnawing curiosity and profound unease inside me demanded answers. Just sitting here watching felt like passive surrender. I needed to understand. I grabbed the topographic map of the forest, a detailed spread showing elevation, trails, water sources, and old landmarks. With a red marker, I started placing X's, marking the approximate locations where I'd spotted the figures. First, the distant tree line, then the 200-yard clearing, now the 100-yard mark near the footpath. I stepped back, hoping a pattern would emerge. Were they following a game trail, heading towards an old, forgotten logging camp? My eyes darted from X to X, but no clear pattern emerged. Their movements seemed random, yet their proximity was undeniably methodical. Each night, they simply drew closer. I knew I couldn't handle this alone. I needed someone else, someone official, to believe me. Desperate for validation, I grabbed my radio, tuning to the frequency for Tower 3, where a new colleague, Kate, was stationed. She was known for being sensible, level-headed. This is Alex from Tower 7. Do you copy, Tower 3? There was a short burst of static, then Kate's clear voice. This is Kate. I read you, Alex. What's up? Kate, have you ever witnessed anything strange out there? Like shadowy figures that seem to be coming closer to your tower each day, I rushed the words out, fearing interruption. A pause. A few seconds that stretched into an eternity. Then Kate's response, tentative. Shadowy figures? No, Alex. I haven't. That sounds, well, honestly, it sounds a little creepy. Are you sure it's not just the loneliness playing tricks on your mind? The isolation can really get to you out here, you know. Have you been getting enough sleep? I gripped the radio tighter, a wave of frustration washing over me. Even Kate, pragmatic Kate, was dismissing me. I know what I saw, Kate. I'm not making this up. There's something out there, and whatever it is, it's getting nearer to my tower every single day, and I have no idea what to make of it. Just as I heard Kate key up her radio to respond, a sharp, unnatural silence descended. The radio went dead, not static, not interference, just an eerie, absolute stillness. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the room. My heart lurched. I frantically tapped the microphone, twisted the frequency dial back and forth, even smacked the old radio a couple of times, desperate to jolt it back to life. Nothing. The silence was immense, oppressive, feeling almost like a physical presence in the room. The dead radio amplified the isolation tenfold. It was like being severed from the world by an invisible, malicious hand, left to fend for myself against an inexplicable phenomenon that was steadily encroaching upon me. Now truly I was utterly, irrevocably alone. With the radio dead, I couldn't warn anyone, couldn't ask for help. Night descended on the forest, and the darkness felt more suffocating than ever. The weight of the evening settled around me like a thick, chilling blanket, tightening with each passing minute. My hands, clammy and trembling, gripped the binoculars. I hesitantly scanned the forest below, almost afraid of what my eyes might confirm. The sinking feeling in my stomach plummeted into a pit of dread as I found what I was looking for. The figures. They weren't just closer, they were almost right underneath me, at the base of the tower. A profound shiver crawled up my spine, raising goosebumps on my arms and the hairs on the back of my neck. The terrifying gravity of the situation slammed into me as I slowly lowered the binoculars, placing them gently on the table as if any sudden movement would shatter the fragile stillness. This was no longer a distant curiosity, no longer a vague threat from the periphery. They were here, almost within arm's reach of my supposed sanctuary in the sky. I was faced with the unsettling reality that my tower, the place I had envisioned as a lookout and a refuge, might in fact be a trap. I felt cornered, my options dwindling, as the silent, unmoving figures closed in. Whatever they were, whatever they wanted, the risk was now immediate, terrifyingly real and deeply personal. I rushed to assess my meager defenses. A flashlight, its beam already dimming. A basic fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. And a flare gun with only a single precious flare tucked into its chamber. No real weapons, nothing reliable for self-defense against whatever these things were. My eyes darted around the small space, the sturdy wooden table, the wobbly chair, the shelves stocked with canned goods. In a frantic burst of anxious energy, I began to move them, dragging the table and chair in front of the entrance, barricading myself as best as my limited strength would allow. It was a pathetic, feeble barrier, I knew, but it was all I had. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the oppressive silence. I sat there, hunched on the floor behind my makeshift defense, waiting, straining my ears for any sound that might indicate what came next. All I heard was the mournful sigh of the wind through the trees, the subtle creaks of the tower, and my own breath. Quick and shallow the minutes bled into hours, each one a slow, agonizing drip. The tower groaned, the wind howled, and every subtle sound sent my pulse soaring. I felt like a cornered animal, eyes darting to the barricaded door over and over again, half expecting it to splinter inwards, revealing whatever awaited me outside. But that moment never came. My own shallow breaths filled the room, a testament to my growing anxiety. Gathering a shaky courage, I reached for the binoculars again, my hands trembling as I lifted them to my eyes. I looked down towards the base of the tower, a horrifying blend of hope and dread filling me. The figures were still there, as stationary as before. They hadn't advanced, but they hadn't retreated either. They seemed to be waiting, as if they were waiting for a specific moment or a sign. The standoff continued, neither side making a move, and I was left to grapple with the unnerving, soul-crushing uncertainty of it all. The tension was an unbearable, living thing in the room. My mind raced through 1,000 different scenarios, each one more terrifying than the last. What did they want? Why were they here? Why hadn't they moved? The questions circled endlessly in my head, a dizzying spiral with no answers. As the first faint rays of dawn began to cut through the oppressive darkness, painting the eastern sky in faint hues of gray and pale pink, I watched through my binoculars as the figures began to retreat. Their forms, still indistinct, seemed to melt back into the deeper shadows of the forest, blending with the trees until they were swallowed entirely by the lingering morning mist. Even though the sunrise should have signified safety and warmth, a profound sense of chilling dread persisted within me. I slumped back in my chair, trying desperately to collect my thoughts, but my mind was a churning whirlpool of unanswered questions, looping back on themselves in an endless, terrifying cycle. The day dragged on, each hour stretching into an eternity as I went through the mechanical motions of my duties. I maintained the tower, swept the dust-laden floors, and forced myself to eat bland canned food, but it all felt robotic, meaningless, against the backdrop of the horrifying uncertainty that awaited me with nightfall several times. I picked up the old radio, tinkering with its dials and connections in a futile attempt to coax it back to life. But it remained stubbornly, eerily silent. The utter absence of human contact, even just a crackling voice over the airwaves, felt like a gaping, raw wound in my reality, amplifying my sense of crushing isolation. As the afternoon waned, I found myself glancing with increasing frequency at the descending sun. The bright, clear sky gradually darkened into deeper hues of orange and purple, casting long, distorted shadows that stretched like grasping fingers across the forest floor. The breathtaking beauty of the sunset was utterly lost on me. Instead, its fading light served only as a grim reminder that another night was swiftly approaching. Another night with the figures, another night of terrifying uncertainty, another night of not knowing what would happen when the world outside my tower plunged into total darkness. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach as the sun finally dipped below the horizon, surrendering the world to the inevitable, all-consuming night. The night sky was darker than usual, a suffocating blanket thrown over the entire forest. There was no moon, the stars seemed to hide, making everything a vast, inky void. My eyes, now accustomed to the profound darkness, could just make out the figures at the base of the tower. They circled a slow, methodical perimeter, staying just at the edge of clear vision. Close enough to be undeniably present, yet far enough to keep me guessing, keep me on edge. My hand rested on the cold, hard plastic of the flare gun, lying on the table beside me. Thoughts rushed through my mind, each one grappling with the same desperate dilemma. Should I fire the flare? Will it drive them away, or will it provoke something I am utterly unprepared to handle? What if it just makes them angry? Suddenly, my ears picked up a noise that cut through the background sounds of the rustling forest. It was coming from directly below, at the base of the tower. This wasn't just the wind or some animal casually passing through. It was a consistent scratching noise, methodical, intentional, a sound like rough stone being dragged against ancient wood. My heart felt like it was about to burst from my chest. Whatever was making that sound was not just wandering around. It was actively, determinedly, trying to ascend the tower. The horrifying realization filled me with a primal mixture of fear and urgent, desperate instinct. Reacting more out of pure, unthinking terror than reasoned thought, I stood up abruptly, the flare gun clutched tightly in my shaking hand. I took a deep, shuddering breath, aiming the gun skyward, and pulled the trigger. The flare shot high, cutting through the darkness like a fiery red comet. For a brief, terrifying moment, the entire forest was illuminated in an eerie, hellish red glow, like a scene ripped from some apocalyptic nightmare. As the flare ascended, the scratching sound abruptly stopped. The figures, bathed in the lurid red light, recoiled, their forms momentarily more distinct, not humanoid in the way of a person, but skeletal, gaunt, impossibly thin, with elongated limbs and heads that seemed too small for their frames. They retreated, melting back into the darkness beyond the trees, their unnatural speed a sickening blur. For a split second, the world was silent, save for the faint hiss of the flare as it reached the peak of its ascent. It was a momentary victory, a fleeting reprieve. But even as the flare began its descent, illuminating a smaller and smaller portion of the forest, the terrible weight of my decision began to sink in. Had I just warded off danger, or had I simply escalated a situation I couldn't fully understand? I was left with an overwhelming, uneasy feeling, standing alone in the fading red glow of the descending flare, pondering the chilling implications of my choice. Then, disaster. My eyes caught it. The flare's fiery tail, arcing downwards, ignited a cluster of bone-dry leaves on the ground directly beneath the tower. My heart sank, a leaden weight in my chest, as I watched a small spark take hold, then spread, quickly blooming into a small fire. I snapped into action, adrenaline surging, grabbing the fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. I rushed down the ladder, my feet practically flying, adrenaline pumping through my veins. My hands worked almost on autopilot, fumbling to remove the flimsy barricades I had set up at the entrance. Ignoring the primal voice in my head screaming about the dangers outside, I threw open the heavy door and raced down the spiral stairs that wrapped around the tower's exterior. My feet pounded the ground as I sprinted towards the growing patch of fire. The fire extinguisher felt heavy, but manageable, as I pulled the pin and aimed its nozzle at the base of the flames. With a desperate squeeze of the trigger, the extinguisher discharged, covering the hungry fire in a cloud of thick white foam. The fire sputtered, crackled angrily for a moment, and then died, replaced by a dense cloud of acrid smoke that slowly began to disperse into the night air. As the smoke cleared, the terrible gravity of what I had just done slammed into me. I had extinguished the fire, yes, but I had also stepped out of the supposed safety of the tower. I was exposed, vulnerable, standing directly on the forest floor, completely unshielded. My eyes darted frantically around the forest, scanning the oppressive darkness for any sign of the shadowy figures. Nothing. They were gone, as if swallowed up by the night itself. While this absence should have brought relief, it did not. Instead, it intensified the cold knot of dread in my stomach. Where had they gone? Why hadn't they seized the opportunity to approach me when I was most vulnerable, out in the open? Their inexplicable absence, rather than reassuring me, raised more unsettling, terrifying questions. Clutching the now empty fire extinguisher like a pathetic shield, I hurried back to the tower. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig made me jump, my nerves frayed to breaking point. My hands were shaking uncontrollably as I locked the door behind me, quickly restoring the barricade. The flare gun lay where I had left it, empty, useless. I picked it up, gripping it tightly, finding some meager, desperate comfort in its cold, metallic weight. Looking out through the window, the figures were still nowhere to be seen. But that didn't alleviate the crushing weight of unease that had settled over me. They were out there. I knew they were. I sat there, flare gun still clutched in my hand, my mind a churning vortex of terrifying thoughts, waiting for the first light of dawn. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a couple of hours, the sun began to rise. Its golden light slowly pierced the darkness, painting the eastern sky with soft shades of orange and pink. Just as the dawn broke, piercing the gloom like a spear, the radio crackled back to life. A voice, Marcus's voice, burst through the static, clear as day. "Tower 7, this is base. Do you copy?" "I copy." I practically yelled into the microphone, clutching it like a lifeline, tears blurring my vision. "You won't believe what happened here last night, Marcus. I saw those figures again, but they were closer, right at the base of the tower. And the radio went dead. Everything just went silent, Marcus. Utterly silent." "Slow down, Alex. Take a breath. Start from the beginning, everything." His voice was calmer than I expected, but I heard a subtle edge of concern. I recounted everything in a frantic rush. The figures, their unnatural forms, the methodical scratching at the base of the tower, my desperate decision to fire the flare gun, and the terrifying, accidental fire it caused. "I had to put the fire out myself, Marcus. The extinguisher is empty, and there's a burned area right near the tower. They were there, Marcus, trying to climb up. There was a long silence on the other end. Then Marcus's voice, firm but with an underlying weariness. "All right, Alex, understood. We're sending a rescue team. Patrol Unit 5 is en route. Sit tight. Do not leave the tower again. Understood, understood," I croaked, slumping back. Relief, profound and dizzying, washed over me. Within a couple of hours, I heard the distant rumble of an engine growing steadily louder. A wave of light-headed euphoria swept through me as a Forest Service vehicle finally pulled up near the tower. The rescue team, 2 men and a woman in Park Service uniforms, poured out, their faces grim as they took in the tower and the small, charred patch of forest floor. When they reached me, their expressions shifted. They could clearly see I was visibly shaken, my face pale, my eyes wide and bloodshot. "Are you all right, son?" one of the men asked, his voice rough but kind. "You been better," I replied, forcing a weak, wobbly smile. They began their inspection. They found the markings at the base of the tower, exactly where I had heard the scratching. Deep gouges, like claw or grip marks, were etched into the seasoned wood, confirming that something had indeed tried to climb up. They also found the charred remnants of the flare casing and the extinguished, blackened area of the fire. All the physical evidence was there. Despite this, a profound skepticism clouded their faces as they looked over the evidence. Could be raccoons, kid, or maybe a wolverine got real bold, one team member suggested, examining the claw marks, his brow furrowed in concentration. You think a raccoon fired a flare gun and started a fire? I snapped, frustrated by their immediate, dismissive disbelief. It's more likely you're suffering from isolation and stress, Alex. The woman on the team chimed in, her voice gentler, but equally dismissive. These jobs can really get to you, especially when you're out here alone for weeks on end. Your mind starts playing tricks. But I know what I saw, I insisted, my voice rising in desperation. These weren't animals. They were human-shaped, tall figures just standing there, and they were getting closer each night. I saw them. Look, Alex, the team leader offered, his tone not unkindly but firm. We all get a little stir-crazy out here. It's normal. You said yourself the radio was out. You were cut off, isolated. Maybe your mind just filled in the blanks. He gave me a sympathetic but pitying look. I shook my head in utter disbelief. It was brutally clear they weren't taking my claims seriously, dismissing my terrifying experience as nothing more than the product of isolation and perhaps even paranoia. As I climbed into the rescue vehicle, my feelings were a complicated, conflicting mess. On one hand, immense relief flooded over me. I was finally getting out of that isolated, horrifying place. On the other, a furious frustration boiled within me, like a kettle on a stove. Despite the physical markings, the charred remnants of the flare, and my earnest, heartfelt recounting of the events, they didn't believe me. They attributed my experience to isolation, to stress, to an overactive imagination, and that utter lack of validation infuriated me beyond words. The engine roared to life, and we started to pull away. I glanced back at the tower, its weathered wooden frame growing smaller in the rearview mirror until it was swallowed entirely by the dense, indifferent forest. As the vehicle navigated through the uneven, rutted forest road, I couldn't help but think about what was left behind. The tower, the strange markings, and the unknown figures that surely still lurked in the silent depths of those woods. These weren't just figments of my imagination, they were real. My mind kept replaying the events over and over, an endless, tormenting loop. And I couldn't escape the nagging, chilling thought that maybe the forest was harboring something it shouldn't, something inexplicable and unnerving that defied all logic and understanding. That feeling, that pervasive sense of wrongness, stuck with me, a heavy, cold passenger, as we continued to drive away. Years have passed since that summer. The memory of those unexplained figures still haunts me, a constant, low thrum of dread beneath the surface of my everyday life. After much internal debate, after countless nights of restless sleep and replaying the events in my mind, I finally decided it was time to visit the tower once more. I needed closure, or perhaps I needed to prove to myself, definitively, that it was real. As I drove towards the familiar edge of the forest, my hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. I parked my car at the edge of the tree line, the air already thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, and took a deep, fortifying breath, steeling myself before I started the long, familiar hike to the tower. Reaching the base of the tower, it appeared almost exactly as I remembered it, a silent sentry against the vast expanse of the sky. Except now, thick, gnarled vines crawled like veins up its weathered sides, reclaiming it, slowly pulling it back into the embrace of the wilderness. No one had used this tower in years, the Park Service having decommissioned it long ago, replacing human lookouts with automated systems. I placed my hand on the rough, wooden railing of the external stairs and started ascending. The steps creaked under my weight, a familiar, melancholy sound that instantly pulled me back in time. I could feel the years of disuse in the worn wood, the air thick with dust and lingering, unspoken memories. As I climbed higher, I remembered the countless times I had made this same journey, always with a sense of duty, but never with the profound apprehension that coiled in my gut now. Reaching the landing just before the very top, I paused, my breath catching in my throat. This was it, the last few steps that led directly to the observation room, the glass-enclosed area that had been both my sanctuary and my prison. Taking a deep breath to steady myself, I climbed the remaining stairs and found myself standing in front of the closed door. The paint was peeling in brittle flakes, the metal handle tarnished with age and neglect, but it was just as I remembered it, a portal to a past I couldn't shake. My hand hesitated over the doorknob, my fingers hovering, an internal battle raging. Finally, mustering a desperate courage, I grasped the handle and turned it slowly. The door groaned, a long, drawn-out cry, and creaked open, revealing the room beyond. As I stepped inside, it was like walking into a time capsule, preserved in a thick layer of dust. The same sturdy wooden table stood in the center, the same wobbly chairs pushed haphazardly beside it. Even the same old, silent radio set that had once connected me to the outside world, a forgotten relic of communication. A profound layer of dust covered everything, giving the room an air of abandonment, a silent testament to the passage of time. But despite the desolation, it felt strangely like coming back to an old, unfinished chapter of my life, one that I had tried to close but had never truly forgotten. I walked slowly over to the main observation window, my old binoculars still clutched in my hand, and looked out, bracing myself for what I might see, half expecting to see them. But for now, the forest below was calm, almost serenely peaceful. It offered me no answers, only a stark reflection of the mysteries I had lived through. My gaze swept over the area where I had most often seen those elusive figures, the clearing at 200 yards, the footpath at 100. Nothing unusual caught my eye, just the typical, unchanging sea of green. I was about to turn away, a pang of hollow disappointment settling in, when in the absolute periphery of my vision, I caught a flicker of movement. A dark shape lurking in the deepest, densest part of the forest, almost indistinguishable from the shadows. My heart leaped into my throat, a cold, sickening lurch, and I quickly, frantically, turned the binoculars towards where I thought I had seen them, focusing with desperate intensity. But there was nothing there now. I scanned the area intensely, sweeping the binoculars back and forth, but found nothing out of the ordinary. Had I really seen them? Or was my mind, after all these years, finally playing tricks on me, conjuring ghosts from my own trauma? The question hung in the air, unanswered, a persistent echo of my past. Either way, I decided it was time to go. The air in the tower felt heavy, oppressive, and the quiet was too profound. I put down the binoculars, my hands still trembling slightly, and took one last, lingering look at the vast green forest below. Real or not, the figures remained a mystery, a raw, unclosed chapter in my life. With a heavy heart, a sense of unresolved dread still clinging to me, I left the observation room, closed the creaking door behind me, and made my slow way down the tower stairs. I started my walk back to the car. The forest around me was serenely beautiful, but the unease still sat heavy in my stomach, a cold, hard stone. As I drove away, the tower grew smaller and smaller in my rearview mirror, until it was swallowed entirely by the encroaching, silent woods. Though years had passed, though I had left that place, the experience remained etched in my memory, an unhealable scar. No one had ever truly believed my story, dismissing it as a product of isolation and an overactive imagination. But I knew what I saw, and I knew what I felt. And what I felt, deep down, was that something had been set in motion that summer, something that had not ended when I left that tower. It's one of those nights again, years after the tower, the kind where the weight of the day presses me deep into the worn cushions of my old couch. My fingers play absent-mindedly with the remote, sifting through an endless, mind-numbing stream of channels. After a moment of indecision, I finally settle on a show, a gritty crime drama that usually grips my attention, pulling me into its fictional world. Just as I start to lose myself in the unfolding storyline, a sound interrupts the scene, a distinct, repetitive noise. Tap, tap, tap. My ears instantly tune in, focusing on the window from where the sound originates. Reflexively, I press the mute button on the remote, and the room plunges into a deeper, unsettling quiet, amplifying the tapping. There's a distinct pattern to it, not like random noise, not like a tree branch or rain, but something more deliberate, more intentional. My mind races, scrambling to find a logical, mundane explanation. Maybe it's just the wind playing tricks, I think, trying to convince myself, even though the air inside the house feels stagnant and the curtains hang limp, without even the slightest quiver. I strain my ears, listening intently for other natural sounds that might accompany the wind, the rush of leaves, the groan of a swaying tree branch, but there's nothing. Only silence, a vast, oppressive silence that's interrupted by that persistent, unnerving tapping. A familiar feeling of unease, cold and sharp, courses through me, but I swiftly push it away, trying to convince myself it's nothing. I take a deep, shaky breath and with a dismissive shrug, crank up the volume on the TV. The voices of the actors are louder now, a cacophony of artificial sound, competing with the eerie, rhythmic taps. In my heart, I hope the distraction is enough to keep the unsettling thoughts, the creeping dread at bay. As the night wears on, the room seems to grow colder, despite the thermostat indicating a perfectly comfortable room temperature. The artificial light from the television begins to feel less inviting, its bluish hue making the shadows in the corners appear more pronounced, more menacing. Every time I convince myself the tapping has ceased, that it was just a fleeting anomaly, it returns, sometimes louder, sometimes softer, but always persistent, always there. My attempts to focus on the TV show are constantly disrupted, my attention darting between the unfolding drama on screen and the increasingly ominous noise from the window. Anxiety bubbles within me, a tight knot in my chest, making me fidget with the remote and constantly adjust my seating position. I pull a thick blanket from the back of the couch, wrapping it tightly around myself, more for psychological comfort than for actual warmth. Time passes in this state of heightened alertness, my internal clock sensing the night deepening, growing heavier, even though the room remains bathed in the TV's artificial glow. The taps become sporadic, their unpredictability further feeding my unease, making me jump at every little sound. In a sudden, desperate bout of courage, or perhaps sheer exasperation, I finally decide to face the noise head-on. I stride purposefully over to the window and pull back the curtains with a swift, decisive motion. The outside is pitch black, an inky void, with only the faint outline of trees and distant houses visible under the dim streetlight. But there's no obvious source for the tapping. No branch, no animal, no person. Convinced, against all my instincts, that it might just be my mind playing tricks on me, or perhaps some nocturnal bird or insect inexplicably drawn to the window, I decide it's time to retreat to the familiar comfort of my bedroom. The idea of a soft bed, of the safety of closed doors, is too inviting to resist. After turning off the TV, the room is plunged into an oppressive darkness, with only the occasional, maddening tap serving as a chilling reminder of the evening's deepening mystery. I make my way to the bedroom, deliberately avoiding looking back at the window. Once inside, I quickly lock the door, a habit I never felt the need for until tonight. Nestling under the covers, the familiar scent of my sheets, the comforting weight of the blankets, slowly begins to calm my racing mind. Despite the oddities of the evening, sleep starts to claim me. The distant, muffled taps become softer, fainter, further away, as if they too are retreating into the silent depths of the night. My eyelids grow heavy, and soon a restless sleep envelops me. As the days turned into weeks, the chilling consistency of the tapping solidified its presence, becoming an unwelcome, terrifying part of my nightly routine. Much like an old clock that chimes every hour, it punctuated my evenings with unnerving, mechanical precision. Each night, without fail, I'd catch myself glancing at the window more frequently as the expected time approached, my heart rate subtly increasing in anticipation, a cold dread settling in. The tapping was eerily punctual, its rhythm echoing in my mind even during the day, a constant, low-level hum of anxiety. Its predictability became both a curse and a strange, morbid fascination. I started organizing my evenings around it, subconsciously avoiding activities that might coincide with its onset. Dinners were timed earlier, phone calls with friends were either hurried or dragged on endlessly to ensure I was free and alone when the tapping began. My nights became a perpetual tug-of-war between an overwhelming curiosity and a deep-seated, profound discomfort. I questioned my own sanity, wondering if the isolation from the tower had finally, irrevocably, broken something inside me. In moments of utter frustration, I found myself talking to the silent walls, my voice hushed, voicing my exasperation, my fear. Why now? Why every night? What do you want from me? The questions hung heavy in the air, met with only the deafening silence that inevitably preceded the now inevitable tapping. One evening, out of sheer, desperate exasperation, I walked directly over to the window and pulled back the curtain with a forceful tug. It must be a tree branch, I mumbled to myself, a desperate attempt at rationalization, but looking out, I was met with a startling, horrifying revelation. The lone, ancient oak tree in my yard stood a good, impossible distance from my window. It was not possible for any of its gnarled, reaching branches to come even close. The following night, armed with a newfound, desperate resolve, I positioned a hard wooden chair directly facing the window. I sat down, resting my hands on my lap, my gaze fixed intently outside, my eyes burning, waiting for the tapping to begin. The rhythmic ticking of the room's old clock became the only sound I was truly tuned into, each tick echoing the passing seconds, making them feel stretched and impossibly long. The anticipation was palpable, a live thing in the room, making the profound silence even more pronounced, more terrifying. As the minutes wore on, my body began to betray my determination. My posture slumped, and the heavy weight of my eyelids became almost unbearable, my vision blurring with exhaustion. But then, just as I was on the very brink of succumbing to a restless sleep, it came. Tap, tap, tap. A jolt of pure adrenaline shot through my veins, instantly clearing my mind. Swiftly, I parted the curtains, my eyes darting in every direction, desperate to catch a glimpse of whatever or whoever was behind the incessant noise. The backyard, bathed in the soft, ethereal glow of the quarter moon, appeared utterly unchanged. There was no movement, no sign of any disturbance, nothing but the rhythmic chirping of the crickets, the only other sound in the suffocating quiet. Confusion and a boiling frustration bubbled within me. I leaned further out, my head nearly outside the window frame, straining my ears, hoping to catch a stray sound or movement, perhaps something just beyond the perimeter of the yard, just out of my direct line of sight. But it was futile. The source of the tapping remained elusive, maddeningly out of reach. A crushing wave of disappointment weighed heavily on my shoulders. Despite my desperate efforts, the sound persisted, a mocking, relentless rhythm. I felt utterly defeated, exhausted to my core. With a last, lingering glance outside, I drew the curtains closed and stumbled to my bedroom, the tapping echoing inside my head. It's been a few nights since then, and I find myself sitting in the living room, the TV playing some mundane sitcom, but I'm not really paying attention. My mind is elsewhere, a constant replay of the tapping. The clock ticks away, each second echoing the growing anticipation, the dread that tightens its icy grip on my stomach. As the time approaches, that familiar, sickening feeling settles in, colder and heavier than ever before. Then it begins. Tap, tap, tap. The sharpness of each tap pierces through the room, a needle in my frayed nerves. With a deep, shuddering breath, I finally muster the courage to confront whatever is behind this nightly, unbearable disturbance. Swiftly, I approach the window, my hands trembling as I grab the curtains, pulling them aside with a violent tug. My heart almost stops. The window is plastered with hundreds of notes, thin sheets of white paper, each one bearing the same ominous, chilling message in dark, hurried, almost frantic scribbles. "Let me in." Shock and profound disbelief washed over me, a nauseating wave. My fingers trembled violently as I reached out, picking one of the notes off the glass, desperate to find something, anything, on the other side that would provide a clue, an explanation. But there was nothing. It was just a plain white note with that single, eerie request. "How is this even possible?" I whispered to myself, my voice shaky, barely audible. My reflection in the glass looked just as startled, just as terrified as I felt. For a fleeting, desperate moment, I considered the possibility of a prank, a cruel joke, but the sheer gravity and persistent nature of the situation, the undeniable reality of the tapping, suggested otherwise. And then there was the tapping itself, that incessant, otherworldly tap, tap, tap. It sounded more desperate now, more urgent, as if begging, urging me to heed its terrifying message. The rhythm became faster, more chaotic, a frantic, desperate plea, and I could feel its urgency deep in my bones, a vibration that resonated through me. I pressed my palms against my ears, trying to block it out, trying to silence the terrifying sound, but it was futile. It was as if the sound had found a home inside my head, echoing in the hollows of my skull. "Stop, just stop," I shouted at the window, my voice raw, hoping my voice carried enough force, enough command, to silence whatever invisible, malevolent force was at play. But the tapping only intensified, becoming a frantic, percussive assault, and I could feel the vibrations through the floor, through the walls, through the very core of my being. The room felt colder, a chilling, supernatural cold that seeped into my bones. Every primal instinct screamed at me to run, to flee, to get as far away as possible. But I couldn't move. With a newfound, desperate resolve, I faced the window, my voice hoarse. "Who are you? What do you want?" I demanded, the words echoing in the sudden, horrifying silence that followed. But there was no response. Just the chilling, oppressive silence of the night, and the hundreds of notes staring back at me. Hours seemed to pass as I stood there, frozen, rooted to the spot. The notes remained, plastered to the glass, their simple, terrifying message burned into my mind. The tapping, however, had ceased, leaving behind an oppressive, suffocating stillness in its wake. Every fiber of my being was alert, hypersensitive, listening intently for any sound, any subtle sign of movement, any hint of its return. The silence stretched on interminably, and a deep, bone-weary fatigue began to set in, a profound exhaustion that went beyond physical tiredness. I contemplated tearing off all the notes, destroying them, erasing every trace of the night's horrifying events, but a primal, paralyzing fear held me back. What if removing them angered whatever force had placed them there? What if it invited something worse, something I couldn't even imagine? The night dragged on, with me caught in a whirlpool of terrifying thoughts and conflicting emotions. The quiet was occasionally punctured by the distant, mundane sounds of the night, a passing car, a dog barking, but the tapping remained absent. Finally, as the first faint rays of dawn began to break, piercing the darkness with the promise of day, exhaustion finally took over. My body felt heavy, my mind foggy and numb with fatigue. With one last, lingering glance at the window and its haunting, silent messages, I retreated, stumbled to my bedroom. Every step felt like a mile, each movement a Herculean effort, and by the time I collapsed into my bed, the immense weight of the night's discoveries pressed down on me, pulling me into a restless, nightmare-filled sleep. The next morning, as the sun peeked through the gaps in the curtains, casting a warm, golden glow across the room, a renewed, if desperate, energy coursed through me. The haunting, inexplicable events of the past few nights had taken their toll, draining me, but now a steely determination began to replace the fear. The tapping, the notes, I needed answers. And today was the day I intended to find them. The local electronics store was just a short, 5-minute drive away. The familiar chime of the door greeted me as I entered, a jarringly normal sound after the surreal horrors of my nights. Rows upon rows of gleaming electronics lined the shelves, but I was on a singular, urgent mission: security cameras. As I browsed the aisles, a store employee approached. He was a young man, probably in his early 20s, with bright, eager eyes and an earnest, helpful expression. "Can I help you find something, sir?" he asked, clearly eager to assist. "Looking for outdoor security cameras," I replied, my tone more decisive, more determined than I actually felt. He nodded, a friendly smile on his face, leading me to a section filled with various security devices, sleek boxes promising protection. As I picked up a set of cameras, examining them carefully, he tilted his head, giving me a curious, almost playful look. "Expecting some late-night visitors?" he asked, a light chuckle in his voice. For a moment, I was caught completely off guard, the chilling memories of the previous nights flooding back, overwhelming me. But I pushed them aside, forcing a tight-lipped, unconvincing smile. "You could say that," I responded, attempting to sound casual, dismissive, as if this were a mundane concern. He chuckled again, oblivious to the dread churning in my stomach. "Well, these cameras should do the trick. They have excellent night vision and really sensitive motion detection. Even a squirrel scampering by will trigger them." I nodded, appreciating the assurance, even if it was just sales talk, a hollow promise against an unknown threat. "Thanks," I managed. "I'll take them." As I headed to the checkout counter, the unexpected weight of the boxed cameras in my hands was oddly comforting, a tangible representation of taking back control. It was a concrete step towards solving the terrifying mystery that had consumed my nights. But deep down, a nagging, chilling feeling remained, a cold whisper in the back of my mind. What if these cameras, what if this desperate act, captured something far beyond what I was prepared to see? What if it confirmed the darkest, most impossible truth? Arriving back home, the mid-morning sun cast a warm, golden glow that somehow seemed at odds with the eerie, chilling occurrences of the past few nights. I unboxed the cameras with a hurried, almost frantic precision, laying out all the components, the lenses, the wires, the mounting brackets on my living room floor. The instruction manual mercifully laid out a straightforward setup process, and I found myself profoundly thankful for the simplicity, for a task that didn't involve the paranormal. I inspected each camera carefully, familiarizing myself with its features before deciding on the best, most strategic spots to install them. First, I mounted one directly above the window where the incessant tapping originated. This location, I reasoned, should offer a broad, comprehensive view of the area, capturing anything or anyone approaching the window. Another camera went on the adjacent wall, providing a crucial side angle that would catch any movements missed by the first, a wider perspective. A third camera was placed at a lower angle, focusing directly on the window pane itself, the very spot where the chilling notes had appeared. With the locations decided, I grabbed a sturdy ladder from the garage and set to work, my movements precise, driven by a desperate urgency. Each installation was meticulous, ensuring that the cameras were secured firmly, angled correctly for maximum coverage, every screw tightened with a desperate hope. Every so often, I'd check the live feed on my laptop, making small, precise adjustments to the cameras for the best possible view. After what felt like hours of agonizing effort, the setup was finally complete. I stepped back, my arms aching, to admire my handiwork. The cameras now stood sentinel, silent guardians, ready to record the nightly visitors' every move, every subtle, terrifying shift. As I retreated indoors, the exhaustion hitting me, I couldn't shake off a growing, profound sense of foreboding. Despite the bright sunlight streaming through the windows, the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to loom a bit larger, darker, as if anticipating the inevitable. With every passing hour, the sky outside began to darken, slowly surrendering to the creeping dusk, and night approached once more. As the darkness deepened, I couldn't help but wonder, a cold knot tightening in my stomach, what the night would truly reveal. Would the cameras finally, definitively, validate my terrifying experiences? Or would they unveil a reality far more horrifying, far more incomprehensible than I could possibly imagine? Night enveloped the house, a suffocating blanket of darkness outside seeming almost tangible as it pressed against the windows, eager to seep in. Inside, the room was dominated by the subdued, eerie illumination from the laptop screen, its pale glow casting long, distorted shadows. I was planted firmly in my armchair, every sense heightened, every nerve tingling with a sick anticipation of the inevitable sounds that would break the quiet. Tap, tap, tap. The sound reverberated through the silent room, echoing ominously, a chilling rhythm that seemed to taunt me, to mock my desperate attempts at control. With bated breath and a palpable, icy anxiety, I cycled through the camera feeds, my eyes darting across every inch of the screen, dissecting the surroundings of the window, searching frantically for any sign. My heartbeat seemed to synchronize with the rhythmic tapping, creating a terrifying symphony of dread that filled my ears, pushing against my eardrums. At first, everything seemed as it should be. The backyard was bathed in shadows, the familiar contours of trees and shrubs visible, yet somewhat distorted, eerie in the grainy night vision footage. My gaze moved from one corner of the screen to another, hungry for any clue, any anomaly, any hint that might explain the enigma that had turned my life into a waking nightmare. But as minutes ticked away, slow and agonizing, a frustrating emptiness greeted me. No distinct shapes lurking in the corners, no ethereal figures, nothing but the quiet, unremarkable night accompanied by the relentless, maddening tapping. My hands clenched into fists, a crushing sense of helplessness threatening to engulf me. Every logical explanation, every rationalization I had clung to had evaporated, leaving me grappling with the unthinkable. Was this entity beyond the realm of the cameras, existing in a plane unreachable by modern technology, something truly otherworldly? Then suddenly I noticed it, a flicker. A subtle, almost imperceptible distortion in the camera feed focused directly on the window pane, the very spot where the notes had appeared. I froze, my breath catching in my throat, a cold dread washing over me. I leaned even closer to the screen, my eyes narrowing, desperate to see. The tapping, as if in response, grew louder, more insistent, more frantic, as if urging me to pay attention, to truly see. With meticulous care, my trembling fingers rewind the feed, playing it back in slow motion. The image shudders slightly before revealing a sight that sent profound, icy shivers down my spine, chilling me to the bone. A vague, human-like distortion began to manifest near the window, its form flickering and wavering like a mirage, like heat haze off hot asphalt. It was ethereal, almost smoke-like, a translucent void. Fear battled with a horrifying fascination as I watched this ghostly, impossible figure navigate the space near my window, the tapping echoing hauntingly, unmistakably, from its direction, emanating from its very form. Its movements were fluid yet disjointed, unnatural, as if struggling to maintain a coherent form in our physical reality, like a creature of pure energy trying to solidify. It was as if I was witnessing a being from another dimension, one that didn't adhere to the rules of our world, a creature of pure shadow and distortion. The notes, the tapping, the figure, it all converged into a horrifying, undeniable realization. Something profoundly paranormal was reaching out to me. Every fiber of my being screamed to look away, to escape this nightmare, to run, yet I was rooted to the spot, transfixed, paralyzed by the eerie, impossible spectacle unfolding before me on the screen. The entity lingered near the window for what felt like an eternity, its form shimmering, before it slowly began to retreat, dissolving into the deepest shadows as mysteriously, as impossibly as it had appeared. The tapping ceased, leaving a deafening, terrifying silence in its wake. I sat there, the pale glow of the screen painting my face in a stark, ghostly light, the lines between reality and the supernatural blurring, irrevocably, and a profound, bone-deep sense of dread settled deep within me. A permanent resident. I slowly, almost instinctively, pushed the laptop away from me, as if the screen itself were radiating the chilling presence. My limbs felt stiff and heavy, with an exhaustion that stemmed not just from the late hour, but from the immense, crushing emotional toll of the evening's events. I rose from the armchair, my body aching, and made my way towards the bedroom. The soft padding of my bare footsteps on the wooden floor was the only sound breaking the eerie, suffocating silence of the night. The bed looked inviting, a promise of escape, the cool sheets tempting me with a reprieve from the whirlwind of emotions that had consumed me. I sank onto the mattress, pulling the covers up to my chin, seeking a physical barrier against the unknown. The room was shrouded in absolute darkness, the only faint light emanating from the distant, pale glow of the streetlights outside. As I lay there, trying to find a comfortable position, trying to calm my racing heart, my mind raced, replaying the night's events in a terrifying, endless loop. The distortion, the human-like figure that wasn't human, and the relentless, desperate tapping all merged into a jumbled, terrifying mess of fear and profound uncertainty. Why me? I silently questioned, the immense weight of the unknown pressing down on me, crushing me. What does it want? The repetitive, chilling message, "Let me in," played in my mind, a tormenting mantra. Each repetition intensified the sense of dread, burrowing deeper into my psyche. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing away the terrifying images that threatened to consume me, to drag me into madness. The lingering, nauseating sensation of being watched, of not being alone, gnawed relentlessly at the edges of my consciousness. Every creak of the house, every rustling of the curtains, amplified my anxiety, making me jump, making me gasp for air. I pulled the covers tighter around me, as if the thin fabric could somehow shield me from the lurking, malevolent presence outside, or perhaps already inside. Deep down, a desperate, fading part of me clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, this was all a figment of my imagination, a byproduct of extreme stress or some hidden, unresolved trauma from the tower. But the undeniable, chilling evidence of the camera feeds, the horrifying, undeniable reality of what I had witnessed, made it impossible to dismiss. Something was out there. Something was here. I took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to calm the racing thoughts, to slow the frantic beat of my heart. As the night wore on, I drifted between fitful, fragmented sleep and a terrifying, heightened wakefulness, haunted by the phantom figure at the window, its formless features stretching out to me, its voiceless plea echoing in the darkest recesses of my mind. Let me in, torn between the desperate, gnawing need for answers and the overwhelming desire for safety. I drifted into an uneasy, nightmare-filled slumber, and the haunting, inescapable events of the night cast a dark, suffocating shadow over my dreams, twisting them into horrors. The first rays of sunlight pierced through the gaps in the curtains, casting a warm, golden glow across the room, a cruel mockery of comfort. My eyes slowly fluttered open, the events of the previous night feeling like fragmented echoes of a distant, horrifying nightmare. For a brief, fleeting moment, I indulged in the comforting thought that maybe it was all just a dream, a vivid hallucination. But as I pushed myself up, the immense weight of reality settled back in, a cold, crushing blanket, and the haunting, undeniable memories flooded back, fresh and terrifying. I dragged myself out of bed, every limb feeling heavy, leaden. A glance at the clock told me it was already past 10, the morning well underway. The room was filled with the soft, innocent chirping of birds outside, a stark contrast to the internal turmoil. Heading to the kitchen, my movements stiff and robotic, I made myself a strong, black cup of coffee, hoping the bitter caffeine would clear my mind and shake off the lingering, pervasive unease. As I sipped the steaming brew, my hands trembling slightly, I pondered over the security footage. mulling over whether I should review it again in the cold, harsh light of day. Perhaps the clarity of morning would offer a different perspective, or reveal crucial details I might have missed in my heightened state of nocturnal terror. Despite the daylight, the house felt different, tainted, profoundly altered by the events of the past few nights. Every shadow seemed to loom a bit larger. Every mundane creak of the old house took on a sinister, chilling undertone. To distract myself, to keep the terrifying thoughts at bay, I decided to immerse myself in chores. Cleaning, organizing, and attending to mundane, ordinary tasks became my desperate coping mechanisms, each completed task pushing the eerie, haunting memories further into the background, if only for a moment. The day moved along at its own slow, agonizing pace. I deliberately avoided the living room, avoided the laptop, the window, and the cameras, as if their mere presence might reignite the horror. Instead, I focused on the other parts of the house, seeking refuge in the familiar. I watered the plants, their green leaves a symbol of life, read a book, forcing my eyes to track the words, and even ventured outside for a walk in the garden, feeling the sun on my face and the gentle breeze, desperately trying to ground myself in the present, to not let my mind wander back to the paranormal events that had so utterly turned my life upside down. Lunchtime arrived, and I made a simple meal, finding a fleeting solace in the rhythmic chopping of vegetables and the comforting sizzle of food in the pan. I ate by the kitchen window, watching the mundane world outside, trying to anchor myself, to convince myself that everything was normal. As the hours rolled by, a looming, inescapable sense of dread built within me, growing heavier, colder. The inevitability of nightfall, the terrifying potential return of the entity, became a pressing, suffocating concern. I contemplated leaving the house, seeking refuge elsewhere, but the idea of running away from my own home felt like admitting defeat, a final, abject surrender. And then, almost imperceptibly at first, the room began to darken. The golden hues of the afternoon slowly gave way to the cooler, deeper tones of the evening. Shadows lengthened, stretching like grasping fingers, and the sounds of daytime began to be replaced by the nocturnal chorus of crickets, a stark, unsettling transition. I closed my eyes, took a deep, shaky breath, mentally preparing myself for another night, another descent into terror. The evening sky darkened, casting a gloomy, oppressive ambience over my living room. I was sitting rigidly in my favorite armchair, desperately trying to immerse myself in a forgotten book, but the suffocating atmosphere, the anticipation, made it impossible to concentrate. Every mundane creak of the old house made me jump, my nerves frayed. Then I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. Each strike resonated louder, more insistent, a percussive assault on my raw nerves. With my heart racing, a frantic drumbeat in my chest, I decided that enough was enough. Tonight, I would confront this entity head-on, whatever it may be, whatever the cost. With a surge of desperate, irrational determination, I marched towards the window, my feet heavy on the floorboards. The tapping continued, relentless, more insistent with every step I took, mocking my fear. Grasping the window handle, its cold metal a shock against my clammy skin, I braced myself for whatever horror awaited on the other side. With a swift, almost violent motion, I flung it open. A gust of chilling, unnatural wind hit me immediately, sending profound shivers down my spine and ruffling the pages of my neglected book, scattering them across the floor. I peered into the absolute darkness of the night, straining my eyes for any sign of the elusive, terrifying figure, but the yard was empty. No shadows, no smoky figure, nothing, yet despite the absence of any visible presence, the atmosphere around me changed dramatically, becoming heavier, denser, more suffocating, as if something invisible had just entered the room. Then from seemingly nowhere, a soft, ethereal voice murmured, a whisper that seemed to brush against my very soul. "Thank you." Every fiber of my being screamed that something was horribly, irrevocably wrong. The very air in the room felt different, denser, crackling with an unseen energy. My breathing became shallow, ragged, and my heart thudded loudly, painfully against my ribs. The horrifying realization dawned on me, a cold, sickening clarity. I had done the one thing Silas had warned me not to do, the one thing I shouldn't have. By opening the window, by responding to its desperate plea, I had inadvertently given the entity the invitation it had desperately sought. It was inside my own home. The surroundings now seemed alien, twisted. The walls appeared to close in on me, the familiar furniture morphing into monstrous shapes in the dim light, and the shadows cast by the subdued lighting grew darker, more menacing, seeming to writhe. A profound, terrifying tension filled the space, a tangible presence. I could feel it, a lingering, predatory presence just beyond the periphery of my vision, unseen but undeniably there. I mustered the courage to speak, my voice a mere rasp, shaking uncontrollably with a raw, primal fear. "Who are you? What do you want?" There was a momentary, agonizing silence, a void that seemed to swallow all sound. Then the whisper returned, colder and more distant than before, yet impossibly close. "You let me in. I was trapped, bound. Now I'm free." Chills, deep and bone-aching, ran down my spine. Trapped by what? Why were you tapping on my window? Why me? Another pause, even longer this time, as if the entity was weighing its words, considering its response, or simply savoring its victory. "I was bound, unable to move on, unable to cross. Your window, it was a gateway, a fragile tear. Every tap, every note was a plea for release, a desperate cry. The dread intensified, morphing into a cold, crushing despair. But why my window? Why did you pick me? Why here?" The voice grew fainter, a mere wisp, as if receding into an impossible distance, yet the chilling, triumphant undertone remained. "You noticed, you responded, most ignore, most stay safe. But you opened the door. You let me in." As the voice faded entirely, an oppressive, absolute silence blanketed the room, heavier and more profound than before. I stood frozen, paralyzed, my mind racing, scrambling to process the horrifying, earth-shattering revelation. The room grew colder, impossibly so, a freezing, unnatural chill. Each subtle creak of the floorboards, every faint rustle of the curtains, magnified the overwhelming feeling of unease, of being utterly vulnerable. The room felt foreign now, alien, tainted. The shadows cast on the walls no longer seemed innocent, benign. They morphed and moved in the dim light, assuming ominous, monstrous forms that played cruel tricks on my weary, terrified eyes. It seemed like the very house was alive, breathing with an eerie, malevolent life of its own, no longer a sanctuary. I stumbled away from the window, my legs suddenly weak, a profound sense of defeat settling in, a cold, heavy weight. There was a weariness in my bones, a deep-seated exhaustion that went far beyond the physical. I retreated to my bedroom, pulling the door shut. But there was no escape, no break from the suffocating, heavy dread that enveloped me, that filled the very air. As I lay on my bed, staring blankly at the ceiling, the relentless ticking of the clock on the wall was a cruel, mocking reminder of the inexorable passage of time. The night stretched on, an endless void where minutes felt like hours and seconds like eternities. In the oppressive darkness, I began to hear them. Soft, insidious whispers, distant, echoing footsteps, the faintest, most terrifying rustle of movement, coming from within the house, from within the very walls. Every fiber of my being was on high alert, my nerves frayed to the absolute breaking point. Sleep seemed an impossibility, a distant, unreachable luxury, yet eventually, an exhausted stupor claimed me, pulling me down into a restless, nightmare-filled slumber. I found myself trapped in shadowy, shifting realms, pursued relentlessly by faceless entities. A nightmarish landscape where fear was the only constant, the only reality. I woke intermittently, jolted from the fearful dreamscape by the increasingly insistent noises that occupied the real world. The whispers grew more insistent, more personal, the footsteps closer, more deliberate, and the malevolent presence more oppressive, more tangible. Yet I saw nothing, no clear figure to confront, no entity to plead with, no form to fight. It felt like psychological warfare, a slow, agonizing descent into madness. As the first rays of morning light finally came through the gaps in the curtains, piercing the suffocating gloom that hung over the room, I realized with a profound, terrifying clarity that the boundary between night and day, between dream and reality, was blurring, dissolving. The entity, whatever it was, had woven itself irrevocably into my very existence. Every evening is an exercise in endurance now, a grueling testing ground where time stretches infinitely, warping the very boundaries of day and night. My senses are heightened, painfully alert to every shifting shadow, every subtle sound that permeates the heavy, suffocating silence. In the corners of my vision, dark, shadowy figures lurk, ever-present yet maddeningly elusive, their forms shifting and undulating like the waves of a restless, murky sea. They are near, terrifyingly so, yet just out of reach, just beyond the grasp of my direct sight. Their intentions are as obscure, as unknowable as their shifting forms. The cold spots manifest suddenly, without warning, patches of freezing, unnatural air that send profound shivers down my spine, chilling me to the bone. They roam freely now, these pockets of bone-numbing cold, drifting through the rooms with an eerie sense of purpose, seeking, perhaps, a warmth to consume, to extinguish, to utterly drain. And then there are the whispers, soft yet constant, a relentless, insidious chorus. The whispers are a terrifying soundtrack to my waking nightmare, a chorus of disembodied voices that speak a single, unceasing phrase, a demand that echoes through the stillness, through the cold, through the perpetual darkness. Let me in, the whispers are relentless, a ceaseless torment. I cover my ears, pressing my palms against them with desperate force, but it's a futile attempt to block out the sound that seems to emanate from within, from the very fibers of my being, from the depths of my own mind. Let me in, there is no break, no escape from the relentless demands that now dominate my existence, that define my every waking moment. I feel trapped, utterly caught in a suffocating web of fear and desperation, a prisoner in my own home, my own body. Let me in, the words are like a mantra, a chilling, insidious prayer. I can feel it, a creeping, unbearable discomfort that worms its way deeper into my mind, seeking to take root, to flourish in the fertile ground of my consuming fear. I resist, summoning every ounce of willpower, every last shred of my former self, to fend off the invasive, malevolent force that seeks entry, that desires complete control. But how long can I possibly hold out against such relentless, agonizing pressure? The nights are long, endless stretches of terror, and the days are a blur of shadow and distorted light, a pale imitation of life. I feel myself slipping, losing ground in this uneven, brutal battle against the encroaching darkness. As the hours drag on, each one an eternity, I find myself succumbing to a profound, soul-deep exhaustion. I sit defeated in the chilling dark, my spirit buckling under the unbearable weight of the relentless, psychological assault. Let me in. The whispers surround me now, an ever-present, suffocating reminder of the entity's insatiable desire, its ravenous hunger. I can feel it, a looming, predatory presence that hovers just beyond the reach of my senses, waiting for the moment of ultimate weakness, the instant of inevitable surrender. And as I sit there in the darkness, the silence broken only by its whispers, I realize that this is it, the endgame. The entity has won. The room is quiet now, save for a faint, internal hum. The whispers are a distant murmur that fades as the first, weak rays of dawn approach. But I know deep in my soul, with a chilling certainty, that this is temporary, a brief intermission, a false reprieve before the cycle begins again, before the darkness returns, bringing with it the crushing cold, the dancing shadows, and the inescapable whispers. And in the chilling, profound silence that follows, I sit, a lone figure in a house that is no longer a home, waiting, bracing myself for the night, for the endless night that promises nothing but fear and the relentless, insidious whispering that seeks complete entry, that seeks to possess, to consume, and to utterly dominate every fiber of my being. The darkness is complete now, an absolute void that swallows all light, all hope, and all sanity. Let me in, the words echo, a chilling theme that marks the beginning of another night, another descent into madness, into profound fear, and into the absolute unknown. And as I sit there in the darkness that is now my inescapable reality, I realize that there is no escape, no salvation, no hope, only the endless night and the relentless whispering that fills it. A terrifying symphony of fear that plays on endlessly, without pause, without end. I brace myself for the night that awaits, the darkness that is now my constant companion, my inescapable, terrifying fate. I know not what the future holds, only that the entity is here, inside me, a parasitic force that seeks deeper entry, that desires complete, utter control, ownership. And as the whispers continue, endless and internal, I realize that I am no longer alone, that I have become a part of something larger, something darker, something that transcends the boundaries of reality, something that has claimed me. The darkness is complete now, a void that engulfs all light, all hope, and all sanity. In this realm of shadows and whispers, I am utterly lost, a captive in a nightmare that has no end and no escape. What chilling detail sent shivers down your spine? Tell me in the comments below.